Good morning from my parents' house in Queensland. I've flown back to help out a friend for a couple of weeks. Ben's still back in Perth, which was very strange. This is definitely the longest we've spent apart in 3 years. We have spent pretty much every moment together since lockdown in 2020. But it has been over 6 months on the road. So today we're going to go through our 6-month budget. But first, van life has actually rubbed off on me and I now make the bed in my room. But the best thing about living here is after I make the bed is I get a shower every day. Don't worry, it's still a mess in here. And I have no one to blame but myself. Normally I say, oh Ben, put your stuff away. Yeah, it's 100% me today. So, my room. Oh, and here we have a full shower. How good. Van life dreams. Woo! Much better. Now, time to actually organise our finances. I do a little bit of this along the way, but it's a bit extra confusing for Ben and I. We both earn in pounds and obviously spend in Australian dollars. So our app that we all do our banking through is this app called Monzo, and it's very big in London, but it allows us to itemize everything into different groups. So I try and keep a little bit on top of that. Numbers is not something Ben is good at, so this definitely falls on me. Definitely got some catching up to do, so we'll start that now. I actually don't know the figures myself, so this will be a surprise to all of us. Okay. It's definitely getting too warm already. It's going to get to about 40 degrees today, so I'm going upstairs to make the use of the aircon. Unfortunately, the nice pool behind me doesn't have any water in it anymore. Anyone else's parents though, when you were young, you could only use the aircon on specific days. I did have to ask my mum if I could use the aircon, but it's allowed today. How nice is this place? Alright, so the numbers are in. I am nice and cool underneath the aircon and ready to get started. So instead of going through every expense over the last 6 months, I thought I'd go through any outliers of the month to help you realize what different scenarios you might need to budget for. And then at the end, I'm going to go through the average we spent in each category per month and then per week. So everyone splits their finances up into slightly different categories, but this is what's worked for us based on what's important and, you know, what we spend our money on. So the first category is fuel, obviously a massive expense traveling around Australia. Next one is bills. So our main bill is our Telstra internet plan. So we spend $75 a month and that gives us 400 gigs of data. So we have a little dongle and antenna set up in the back. So that gives us quite good internet. Telstra being the best throughout Australia. On our phones, we have very cheap. I have an Aldi phone and Ben has someone that tracks through Optus. So it's always a good idea to have Optus if you can. And we spend about $20 a month each on that. So the next one is groceries. So that varies again. Alcohol, so that's anything we buy at a bottle shop. Eating and drinking out. So going out and enjoying food or a coffee or a cocktail by the water is something Ben and I both really love doing. So we do spend a lot of money on this. This is by no means what you have to do. It is just something we really take joy in, so we really do prioritize eating and having a drink out every now and again. And that's how I split it up between eating out and fast food. So fast food, we count anything like when you're filling up with fuel, grabbing a bite to eat. We found traveling in the Subaru, that was the quickest way to spend our money, and it's not something that brings us joy. So we really try and minimize that. So we do try and keep it as a separate little item there to try and help us keep track of that. The next one is accommodation, so it's paying for campsites, or we have in the past paid for like a hostel or a room in a town, like for example in Darwin, all the caravan parks are really far out, so we wanted to go for a drink and not have to worry. So accommodation. Next one is tourist attractions. So tourist attractions really surprised me, and we do spend quite a bit on this. You're in these amazing places and you don't want to miss out. You don't know when you're going to be there next. So it's definitely important to budget for this. So these include things like, we went to a Pearl Harvest festival. We went to a music festival when we were down in Perth. Things like the crocodile tour in Kakadu, or the Mimby Caves tour, or a food tour. And yeah, they're things that really do bring us joy and are important when you're traveling, but it's not something I particularly budgeted for before we left. Next thing is shopping. It's not something we spend a lot of money on, but sometimes you need to buy new clothes. The other thing that we buy is when we've been out, we bought things like really good snorkeling gear up in Exmouth. So that cost, I don't know, about $200 for the both of us. We bought like a kayak. We have since sold that one, but yeah, things like that you need to buy along the way. We bought an umbrella for shade, things like that, as opposed to clothes and, you know, souvenirs. And then we have a category of other, because sometimes it doesn't all fit in. And the last category we have is van stuff. So unfortunately, we've spent a hell of a lot of money on van stuff, so we've had a lot of issues along the way. You will have to budget for some, so this is things like oil changes and things that everyone needs, but things do go wrong and things are expensive when they break down in the middle of nowhere. All right, so we'll go into actually what we did spend per month. So in July, our first month of traveling, we left on the 1st of July and we went from Brisbane all the way up to Darwin and tried to see everything in between. This was by far the biggest outlier of this month was fuel. So we had seen a lot of Queensland, so we spent the first few days just doing a lot of kilometres, and that adds up with fuel. So we ended up spending $1,500 on fuel in July. The other months we spend closer to the $800 mark. So this was a big outlier, and it's something to take note of in your first month of travel, because you will have done the things closer to home. The other outlier was things like shopping and other. So before we left, we didn't fill up any groceries in the van. So our first grocery shop was filling up with pantry items. So when we were in the middle of nowhere, we had some extra food. So we spent a good couple of $100 just on extra groceries. And then we also hadn't finished doing things to the van. So we spent a week in Mount Isa fixing like shelving, making different thermal coverings because our laptops kept running out of charge because it was so cold. And then we also had to buy a new cooker and just little bits and bobs that we didn't do before we left, because if you watched our videos, we left pretty much on a whim. The van was ready and we're like, okay, let's just go and we'll sort everything on the way. So that first month we did spend a good probably like $500 or $600 extra just on little bits for the van that we'd forgotten to do or hadn't organized before we left. So in July, on everything, we spent a total of $4,611, and then we had some van problems. So day 2 of our trip, our alternator went, so we had to get that. We ended up taking it to a garage in Mount Isa, and then there was one other thing, which was, we left without a tire jack. We realized on the road, whoever we bought the van from took the tire jack off, so we had to order a new one of those. So we ended up spending on the van an extra $762. So in July, that brought us to a grand total of $5,373. So that's a lot of money, and that is the most we've spent in the last 6 months. So do budget for your first month being significantly more expensive than the rest. There will be things you forget, but don't worry, you can always get them along the way. So that brings us to August, where we travelled from Darwin across the border into WA and went to Kununurra and up to Wyndham. So our outliers for this month was, again, just other. We just had to buy things for the van, like we had to get new sheets, and we bought a spice rack, we bought a thermocell, things like that really did add up. Oh, and we had to buy a fan. So that ended up coming to a total of $400. So in August, it was a much better month. We spent $3,149 on general expenses. So that's a really good average. However, August was where we ran into a lot of problems. Our van completely broke down, the engine light was on, and we ended up being stuck in Darwin for over 2 weeks. So that meant we ended up spending more on accommodation, although a lot was covered through our insurance, but we did end up, before we went through insurance, we've made a video on how to do insurance based on all the mistakes, so watch that one. But yeah, basically our van problems in August came to a total of $2,188. So we had to get our transmission fixed, had to get a new radiator, then we had to go back because it was done in a backwards order to get the trans line flushed, and then we had to post the radiator because it was meant to be faulty back to Ipswich, and that cost us about $250. So yeah, a total of $2,188 on Van Things on our second month on the road. That was pretty tough. But yeah, so in August, our total, including Van Things, came to $5,338. So pretty close to what we spent in July, but we were proud of how much we had brought down everything else, and our general expenses being around the $3,000 mark was really, really good. So moving on to September. So in September, we went from, where did we go in September? August. The way we keep track of all of this, by the way, is on Google Timeline. Does anyone else use it? Definitely TrackShoe, but I love remembering where I was at all the different times, so that's what I'm using to figure it out. We went from Kununurra, so Wyndham Way, all the way down, and we ended up in Karijini. So this month, what did we spend? So in September, we totaled on general things $3,808. So that's averaging less than $1,000 a week, which is pretty good going. But our biggest outlier in September was fuel. We spent $1,113 on fuel. So that's because in August we were stuck in Darwin, so we were trying to make up some kilometers to try and get to Exmouth before the complete end of season. So yeah, we were definitely chucked in some long days in there. Other than that, we did really well. We spent under $300 on accommodation, though we did spend $480 on tourist attractions. So this month we went to the Pearl Harvest Festival and we bought our WA Parks Pass, which we can't recommend more. It was $120 for the year, and that's unlimited entrance for both of us into any of the national parks in WA, and there's a lot of them, so it was definitely worth it. We did a cave tour in the Mimby Caves, and that was also entry to Emma Gorge, which was about $25 from memory. So then in terms of Van Things in September, we spent $900. Why? I have not written down why. And in terms of van stuff, I've written down $903.06. So it's very specific, but I've not written down why. I do know in September we had to get a new key. I think that was about $100, and we would have reached 10,000 kilometers by that stage. So we did get an oil change, but that doesn't add up to 900. So we'll come back to that when I know why.
So, figured out where that $900 went to. As Shelley mentioned, we had to get the new key cut and we had to get an oil change. However, we also had to buy a new inverter, and we had to get our tyre fixed, as we got a puncture. But also, when we're in Port Hedland, we tried to get our crank angle sensor fixed. We spent half a morning in the garage with the guys, and they weren't able to do anything, but still charged us a fortune for the pleasure. So yeah, we've tried to rub that one out of the memory bank, because it's a pretty awful experience. So yeah, that's where that $900 went. Anyway, back to Shelley.
So that brings us to a total of $4,711 in September. Moving on to October. So October was one of my funnest months, favourite months. We finally made it to Exmouth. So in October, we went from Karijini National Park to Exmouth. So we didn't do a lot in terms of driving distance wise. However, Exmouth is longer to get everywhere than you expect. It's about a half an hour drive everywhere. So we still, even though we were basically stationary for the month, we still ended up spending $965 on fuel just driving around Exmouth and going to the different beaches and all of that. So an outlier in October was definitely us eating out. We spent a whopping $937 in October. We got a little obsessed with Whalebone Restaurant, and the beer there is some of my favorite. The pizzas were amazing. There was live music, and not to mention all of the other good food in Exmouth. So because we were staying put, we'd made friends, so we just kept going out and having a good time. Any other outliers was, yeah, tourist attractions there. We spent $675. So that was basically, I think it was about $300 a head for the day trip we went out on the Ningaloo Reef trying to find the whale sharks. We were end of season, so we missed out on seeing the whale sharks, so we didn't have an epic time swimming with these giant manta rays. We saw whales and dolphins, and honestly it was just an epic day, so that was definitely worth it. And the other outlier in October was buying different things. So we spent a good couple of $100 on good flippers and snorkel gear. We had to buy really good sunscreen, that's obviously reef safe, and we bought a decent umbrella to put up by the beach. So that added up to a total of $4,066 in October. And October was our first month we didn't spend any money on the van. Woo! No money on the van there. So our whole total for October is $4,066. So in November, we made the big trek from Exmouth. We pretty much necked it down to Perth, and then we went a little bit further down to Busselton. So we did spend a lot on fuel. So in November, we spent $1,183 on fuel. It was a lot of kilometers. Another outlier, groceries were about $500. That's pretty good. Our eating and drinking out, even though we're meeting up with family and friends, stayed around the $600 mark, so we reined it in after our time in Exmouth. And so that brings the total of general expenses to $3,356, which, yeah, we average about $3,000 to $3,500 per month on just general life living. We don't really try and rein it in too much, but we try not to spend too unnecessarily either. Unfortunately, during Karijini, our air conditioning broke, which, we lived in an Exmouth, but by the time we got down to Perth, it's a lot cheaper to get things fixed there. However, it still cost us $1,094 to get our air conditioner fixed. Our condenser didn't have some padding around it. Don't ask why, but basically that was broken and we needed that fixed. So that brings our total to November to $4,450. So definitely worth getting the aircon fixed, but another bit of a sting in there. All right, and our last month, 6 months travel on the road was December 2022. So we went from Busselton, we went around Margaret River, we went to Hemland Bay, we went out to Walpole and made it back up to Perth for Christmas, where my family had flown over to meet us. So fuel went down a bit this month. It was $780. And the outliers was, again, eating and drinking out was about $700, was shopping. So this is Christmas presents. We spent a lot of money in Margaret River on like buying wine, like really nice wine bottles and brewery tours. So we bought beer for everyone to take back, and we did do a few changes to the van in December. So we did spend a bit of money in Bunnings and things like that, and all added up to about it did add up to $464. So that brings December general spendings to a total of $3,446. And then in terms of van things, we did have to get, what did we do in December? Oh yeah, we had our spark plugs and our spark plug leads completely were gone, so we bought new ones and replaced them. I was able to do a little bit myself, but my dad and my cousin's partner Cody were there. He's a diesel mechanic, so we got all of that done, and we got all of the new things to get an oil change, and there was one other thing that we fixed. Oh yeah, we fixed our fuel pump, which is super exciting. So that is now quiet, which is so weird to drive a quiet van, but because this is all home jobs and we're very thankful for that, we only had to spend $280 in December on van things. So that brings December to a total of $3,727. So pretty good, only a little bit of van life admin there. All right, so now it's time to break it down and see on average what we spent per month and per week on our first 6 months in van life traveling around Australia in a van that breaks down all the time. So we'll go in order from what we spent the most money to least money. So you guessed it, we spent the most money on fuel, which does make sense. We did travel from Brisbane, across the top, up Darwin, all the way down the coast of Western Australia to Perth, and did some of the southwest and back up to Perth for Christmas. So we did over 20,000 kilometers. So we averaged $1,059 per month, which is $264 per week on fuel alone. So the next thing was, unfortunately, van maintenance and things that went wrong. So we averaged $871 per month, which is another $217 per week. We were pretty unlucky in things that broke down, so most people don't need a budget for that much. But just to put it out there, keep it in mind. The next thing, like we said, we love eating out and is one of our favorite things to do. So we average $772 or $193 per week on eating out, going for cocktails and coffee and the work. So definitely when we become shorter on cash, that is our number one item that we can rein in a little, but for now we love it. Groceries, we spend an average of $465 a month, so that's $116 per week, and that is for the two of us. So the next thing was tourist items. So like I said, this one surprised me. We did some epic things and I wouldn't change it, but we averaged $356 for the two of us per month, or $89 per week on tourist activities. Next one is other, just things that don't fall into an item, you know, our snorkels, our umbrellas, random things for the van that we forgot, like sheets, new doona, a fan, all of that. So that added up to $293 per month, or $73 a week. Next one was accommodation. So we averaged $247 per month, or $61 per week. We became more and more better at stealthing and not paying for accommodation, but yeah, we do like to pay to stay in some places. The next one was shopping, so I don't really know what we spent it on. That was $218 a month, or $54 a week. We don't have that much extra in the van, but it does add up. Then we spent $99 a month, or $25 a week on alcohol, and this is like beer and wine that we'd actually buy out at the Bottle-O. Bills, $95 a month, or $23.75 a week. That's just our internet and our phone plans. We don't have any other bills than that. And the last one we spent least money on is fast food, which is $42 a month, or $10.50 a week on that. So I know we spent a lot, but when you put it all together, so our first 6 months on the road, not including van things, we spent $22,439. So that's an average of $3,740 per month, or $934 per week. However, due to our circumstances, we then had to spend a further $5,228. So that's $871 a month, or $217 per week on van things that went wrong. That's not to mention before we left, when we went to leave the first time, we had to spend $20,000 on an engine conversion. So we've spent a lot more on the van than we first bought it for. Watch some of our previous videos to figure that out. So that brings us to a grand total for 6 months on the road, $27,667 for absolutely everything. So that's an average of $4,611 a month, or $1,152 per week. We're obviously aiming for around the $1,000 per week mark, which I think it's a pretty achievable mark without reining it in too much. And if you don't include the van expenses, we nailed that at $934, but unfortunately, van fixes are a part of life on the road. Okay, so $27,000 over 6 months sounds like a lot of money when you say it as a whole number like that. But let's put it into a little bit of perspective. When we lived in a 2-bedroom unit, luckily we had ocean views in Moffat Beach at the Sunshine Coast, we were averaging, our general spending in general life was $4,200 per month. So that was our rent, which was $400 a week, bills, phone bills, internet bills, water, electricity, all of that, eating out, groceries, yeah, that's what our budget was. Now that does not include our holidays, our trips away we would do in the Subaru, or any extra items like that. So in 6 months of living in a house, we anyway would have spent $25,200. So if you exclude the $5,200 we had to spend on our unfortunately terrible van that we love-hate relationship, we actually, by living on the road, are saving on average $460 per month. Unfortunately, we are then going and spending $870 on average per month on fixing said van. So really, to live this lifestyle for us, from what we were doing before, we are spending an extra $411 per month. Now, we hope over the next 6 months we don't have to spend much more fixing up the van, so we can go to saving some money. But yeah, to put it in perspective, $400 extra a month to be living this absolutely incredible lifestyle that we are not exactly budgeting for. We didn't save up a lot of money for this. We are lucky that we can work online and we could just leave. But yeah, we don't As you can tell by how much money we spend on eating out and going for drinks and coffee, we don't rein it in all that much. And if we needed to, we could, but we definitely are lucky that we are continuously getting an income and we are still saving money living on the road. Our savings are still going up. We're planning this year to fly around, go to New Zealand, back to England, hopefully maybe move to Canada, who knows. But yeah, it's so cool that we can still save, and averaging $100 extra a week to live this lifestyle, I think is worth it. Let us know what you think below. Let's put that into perspective. Perspective? Suspective. Mum's trying to help me.